If you cast your mind over what might be the worst year to be alive for humanity throughout world history, you might think of the early 1350s when the Black Death wiped out half of Europe, or possibly 1918 when the Spanish flu killed 50 to 100 million people. And of course the World War II period comes to mind, especially 1943 and 44, arguably the worst Holocaust years when the death camps were in full effect. However, today we are going to be taking a look at a different period altogether, catalysed by events taking place in the year 536 AD, described by many historians as the worst year to be alive and the beginning of one of the most bleak periods in human history, and the coldest decade for 2,300 years, with the effects still felt over a century later. So, dramatic words, but what actually happened? Well, to set the scene, life in the 6th century AD was not exactly luxurious. Economies were deeply unequal and agrarian, with the average person in Europe, the Middle East or Asia toiling away in the fields day and night, contending with constant warfare, disease, droughts and starvation. Most knew nothing of comfort, the majority of their crop or produce being paid to their lord under the feudal system, and already this might be sounding like a pretty hellish time to be alive, and we haven't even come on to the bad stuff yet. Let me describe then what occurred in 536 AD that triggered this catastrophic period. It all comes down to one main focal point, one main event. A massive volcanic eruption, sounding the starting gun that led to a volcanic winter, plunging much of the world into an eternal darkness. Early in 536 AD, a volcano estimated to be located somewhere either in Iceland or North America exploded with incredible force, spilling enormous amounts of sulfate aerosols up into the atmosphere. The nature of these particles is such that they reflect light, so when the huge amounts were shot into the atmosphere, the effect was that the sunlight directed at Earth was reflected back out into space. This naturally drastically reduced the amount of solar radiation, sunlight, making it through to the Earth's surface. Eventually, these particles flooded so much of the atmosphere that global temperatures plummeted, and the northern hemisphere experienced the most severe and prolonged episode of climatic cooling in the last 2 millennia. And of course, for those people experiencing it without the luxuries of modern science, it must have seemed like some kind of infernal punishment from on high, a terrifying omen for the world. The main sources of primary evidence for these immense events come chiefly from writers in Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire or Eastern Roman Empire, the premier economic and intellectual power in the region at that time under the reign of Justinian. They first describe cooling effects from around March 536 with skies darkening, temperatures dropping sharply and a mysterious fog rolling in across Europe. We now know this fog also extended deep into the Middle East and parts of Asia, plunging entire continents into darkness day and night for 18 long months. Some phenomena were even reported as far away as Peru, where the Moche people experienced 30 years worth of rainfall and flooding before a 30-year period of drought following 536 AD, affecting their culture significantly. And having existed since the 2nd century, the Moche culture faded away not long after. Meanwhile, in India, the Gupta Empire, which had existed since the mid-3rd century, was also ravaged by floods and collapsed shortly afterwards, leading to a period of India being divided into numerous warring regional kingdoms. There was one group of people for whom the fall in temperature actually turned out to be a blessing though. The Arabian world experienced an increase in their soil fertility, leading to successful crop yields, and as early Islam expanded and thrived through the spread of culture but also through ruthless conquest of course, they took advantage of the weakened Byzantine and Sasanian Persian Empire conquering much of the Middle East. Describing events that he witnessed during 536 and its aftermath, the Byzantine scholar Procopius wrote, quote, "For the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon during the whole year." The sun was visible in the sky, it was light in the sky, but it was not bright and its warmth did not reach the earth. Procopius continued, quote, "This year a most dread portent took place. Men were free neither from war nor pestilence nor any other thing leading to death," suggesting every manner of ill fate beset the people of the time. Temperatures in the summer of 536 fell by as much as 2.5 degrees below average, initiating the coldest decade in the past 2,300 years. Crops failed across Eurasia, leading to widespread starvation, and in China, snow fell in summer, delaying their harvest. Elsewhere, apples hardened, grapes soured, and bread production ground to a halt, with cereal crops dying in the fields. The Irish Chronicles, for example, record, quote, a failure of bread from the years 536 to 539. For the average person in the early Middle Ages who was already struggling with desperate poverty, this cold essentially sounded the death knell. The Byzantine Empire supposedly made attempts to relieve its citizens directly from the ensuing famine, but how successful these efforts were, we do not know. Nevertheless, reaching all of its citizens across a vast empire would have been nigh impossible regardless. For others not living within the bounds of a single polity or imperial entity, for those living in semi-organized tribes, for example, there was no such aid. Many were displaced, forced to pack up their lives and migrate to try and survive. And as if this wasn't bad enough, the cooler climate became the perfect breeding ground for disease in the following years. The plague of Justinian, named after the Byzantine emperor, was one such instance of this. Likely originating in or around Central Asia, the plague of Justinian was a pandemic of bubonic plague that swept into the Byzantine Empire, first appearing in sources in 541 AD, before of course further pandemics of this plague returned to Europe later on in the following centuries and in the 14th and 19th centuries as well. A not so fun fact though is that the bubonic plague is an ancient disease that has ravaged humanity for millennia, with scientists even detecting the pathogen that causes it, Yersinia pestis, in the remains of late Neolithic era humans that date to around 4,500 to 2000 BC. But back to the plague of 541, this disease, carried across the Eurasian continent by various ethnic groups and tribes displaced by the events of 536, stormed through the Byzantine Empire and its trade routes. The Lombards moved south from Central Europe into Italy, the early Slavic tribes migrated into the Balkans, the Mongols moved south into China, and other nomadic Asian tribes flooded west. The arriving migrants often clashed violently with the locals, leading to further war and bloodshed alongside the plague, which through maritime routes hit cities in the southeastern Mediterranean and Egypt before moving swiftly through the Levant and into the imperial capital of Constantinople, where these first sources report its appearance in 541 AD. One of these sources is again Procopius, who along with another great plague source, John of Ephesus, the Christian bishop who wrote about the effects on Palestine and Syria, offered insights into the plague's causes and symptoms, describing the telltale buboes or swollen lymph nodes, as well as its extensive death toll and its social and psychological impact. Procopius even describes extensive intervention that Justinian himself made in directing the removal of bodies from Constantinople, as the number of dead from the disease quickly outpaced families' capacity to bury their loved ones properly. Instead, the emperor directed them to be moved outside the city and mass burials to be carried out. I must stress though that as much as we nowadays are used to government intervention for good or ill, this kind of assistance from Justinian in the face of a public health emergency in the 6th century was unprecedented. From the Byzantine Empire, it spread west through regions of the former Western Roman Empire, reaching as far north as German regions and the British Isles. This on the screen now is a map of all references to the Justinianic plague in textual sources, designated with dates and places by black dots, and in cemeteries where plague DNA has been found in human remains, designated by the coloured squares. Emperor Justinian himself is even believed to have been infected, though he survived despite a 60 to 80% mortality rate at the time. About 30 to 50 million people though, about a third to a quarter of the entire world's population at the time, did not survive, perishing from the disease, the first outbreak of which took nearly a decade to subside before returning frequently over the next 2 centuries. The horrific after effects of the year 536 do not stop here though. Further volcanic activity in 539 and 540 AD reinforced the harsh wintry conditions. In the words of Cassiodorus Senator, a Roman monk who lived in Constantinople, quote, "Since the world is not governed by chance but by a divine ruler who does not change his purposes at random, Men are alarmed and naturally alarmed at the extraordinary signs in the heavens, and ask with anxious hearts what events these may portend. The sun, first of stars, seems to have lost his wonted light, and appears of a bluish colour. We marvel to see no shadows of our bodies at noon, to feel the mighty vigour of his heat wasted into feebleness, and the phenomena which accompany its transitory eclipse prolonged through a whole year. Evidence suggests another massive volcanic eruption in 547 AD extended the cooling period more in the northern hemisphere, prolonging starvation and disease. We now refer to this period as the Late Antique Little Ice Age, which did not end until 560 AD, so you can see why the year 536, a horrific year which also went on to serve as the origin and catalyst for a horrific 2.5 decades, is labelled as the worst to be alive in human history, the Year of Darkness. And the Late Antique Little Ice Age profoundly influenced populations and economies, contributing to the decline of empires and the onset of one of the most challenging periods of human existence. And I haven't even discussed the mighty wars and conquests that were raging across the region at this time as well, leading to further suffering for the people living at that time. But perhaps that is a topic for another video. The conquests of Justinian are quite impressive. So did you know about the year 536 and how, quite frankly, dreadful it was, and the subsequent decades were as well? Let me know in the comments down below, and while you're there, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe. You can buy me a coffee down there as well, it fuels me, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.